We will be having a conversation on citizenship and the rights that Kenyans have as citizens of this country. What you can or cannot do, what you are privy or not privy to, what the Constitution allows you to do or not do, to have or not have. And I think this conversation has ballooned over the recent months, recent weeks and recent days, as concerns a gentleman who can or cannot come back into the country for certain things, whose citizenship then is being questioned about to whom he belongs based on where he was born or whose passport he then took. Okay. Can get quite messy, right? But joining us to have this conversation this morning is constitutional lawyer Waikwa, Wanyoike. He's with us today. Good morning, Waikwa.
Good morning, Stu, and good morning to CT and 10.
Good morning.
Great to see you, Waikwa, as always.
Karibu sana, Waikwa. So just giving that intro as we delve into this conversation, it's been something, and it has taken, really the attention of quite a number of people. And we could, in my opinion, get sidetracked from what the real conversation ought to be about when it then comes to citizenship. But if we just give, an intro to this, and I think it's a little bit confusing for people, whether MIGUNA is Kenyan, whether he's Canadian. Now, an order has been given by court to allow this gentleman back into the country for whatever reason, that should he have the right documentation to travel, then he can come in. The order goes as far as to say, then let him have that documentation that is needed for him to travel in. But I think that these are details which then cloud the real conversation that we ought to be having about Kenya, the real conversation about constitutionalism, about citizenship, and what it actually then does mean for every other Kenyan who is part of this conversation, who is looking from the outside into this conversation and saying, okay, so then if I am ever in a pickle as concerns my citizenship or as concerns the rights that I do or do not have, what does that then portend for me? So, Waikwa, as we get into it, on the face of all of this, what do you see as potential stickler points in this whole conversation?
Again, thank you, too. I think it's important to start with the first principles. And for me, the first principles is, what does citizenship mean? And what is the implication of one saying, I'm a citizen of a country? To start, citizenship is not something even given by the Constitution. Especially citizenship by birth. Citizenship by birth is something that inheres in you on the basis of you being a human being. You may debate that when it comes to citizenship by registration and whether somebody has decided to be a citizen of one country or another, even though the issue about deciding is also another issue layered into citizenship. So that's the first thing. And so even the Constitution itself, in the Kenyan, and I'm talking about Kenyan 2010 Constitution, it's not that it gives citizenship by birth. It just articulates what citizenship by birth is. Remember, the Constitution says that there are certain rights that are actually that we have as Kenyans and as human beings on the basis of us being human, not just because we are located in Kenya or whatever other place we may be. So that is important to note. The second thing is the history about Kenya citizenship, and especially when you talk about citizenship by birth in the Kenyan Constitution. What you note is that the Constitution actually talks about two types of citizenship. The first one is citizenship by birth. The second one is citizenship by registration. When it comes to citizenship by birth, it says that your citizen by birth if at the time when you were born, your father or your mother was a Kenyan citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not being born in Kenya that makes you citizen. It's your parentage that makes you citizen. A second point that is extremely important when it comes to citizenship by birth and goes to the question about dual citizenship, because this is where the contention, especially in relation to MIGUNA, comes in. When you go to Article 16, which is the article on dual citizenship, it says that a Kenyan by birth does not lose their citizenship because they acquired citizenship of another country.
Okay.
And so what the Constitution is trying to say is that it doesn't matter whether you have multiple citizenship, because citizenship by birth is so sacred, you can never lose. So for me, those are basic principles even before we get to the case of MIGUNA.
Waikwa, maybe you can remind us, what are the facts before we get into, there's a lot of politics. What happened around this MIGUNA case to bring us here?
So the facts actually goes way back to 1980s, the relevant facts. This is when MIGUNA was a student at the University of Nairobi, and in 1987, he applies to, he's part of the student leadership at the University of Nairobi. He applies to go to Cuba, and then the government actually refuses to give him a passport to travel to Cuba. He wasn't just alone, other students who are also traveling, other student leaders. And so after that, because of his student activism, together with other students, they were targeted, they were arrested, they were tortured, and finally he had to flee the country through Tanzania. And United Nations recognized him as a refugee, and that's how he ended up in Canada. Fast forward, around 2007, MIGUNA comes back to the country. This is not the first time he's coming back to the country. After being in exile, he had been visiting the country severally. And in 2007, he comes to the country and he becomes the advisor, the legal advisor, the constitutional and legal advisor to the Prime Minister. He later obviously falls out with the Prime Minister, but in 2007, he actually tries out for membership or for Member of Parliament for Nyando. So, and he's cleared to run in the primaries, but doesn't get into the actual general election, becomes the Prime Minister's advisor. And then we fast forward to 2017. MIGUNA is a candidate for governorship in Nairobi. He's cleared like any other candidate because he's a Kenyan. And then in 2018, he swears in the Prime Minister. And that's where his little trouble on citizenship starts, when he's abducted from his home, I think on February 2nd. He's held incommunicado. Some of us go looking for him, a number of lawyers, a number of human rights organizations. We find him in Githunguri, but then the police again abduct him and take him to a known location. And finally, he services in Kajiado Law Court. But by that time, the court, the High Court, has already given orders that he be produced in High Court in Nairobi. Of course, the police refused to comply, and on the 6th, they designate him as a prohibited immigrant on the guise that he's no longer a citizen, because they claim that he's a Canadian citizen, and they force him out of the country contrary to court orders. So that is the how the whole
background to all of this.
Yeah.
So Waikwa, let's just look at, because again, like I say, there are many political tinges to all of this, and that's clear as day to anybody who's listening or who has seen how things have played out. But a technical question here: even if then you're granted refugee status for whatever reason, then it doesn't matter when it was, do you then relinquish your citizenship of said country if you become a refugee of another state?
Very important question, too. And I want to take you back because it's good to contextualize this with MIGUNA. Because MIGUNA actually was accepted as a refugee, and it's on that basis, as Justice Chacha Mwita found in December 2018, it's on that basis that he ended up getting a Canadian passport. And so your question is, does that mean that you lose citizenship? The government argument, just to put the government argument forward, is that has always been that MIGUNA lost his citizenship by virtue of getting a Canadian passport. And the government makes the case that under the 1963 and 1969 Constitution, dual citizenship was not permitted in Kenya.
Okay.
So when we argued MIGUNA's case, we advanced 4 reasons why the government was wrong. The first was to argue that citizenship by birth cannot be lost. Just because you acquire citizenship of another country, because in the Kenyan context, it's not even given by law. So the law can't take what it didn't give. It didn't give, the law didn't give citizenship. So how citizenship by birth, so how can it take it? The second point we made is that, in fact, under the 1963 and 1969 Constitution, dual citizenship was not prohibited for all classes of people. It was only for certain classes of people. And there is a long history about that, which has policy implications why certain classes were selected and prohibited to retain dual citizenship. And just very quickly, these are classes of citizens from other Commonwealth countries who, because they were citizens of Commonwealth, also because of the British Empire concept, also benefited they benefited to be Kenyan citizens before independence. And what Kenya was trying to do is to make them, as a policy choice, to make sure that they choose citizenship where they would want to remain. So that's the class that was prohibited. And in fact, because it's very easy for people to sensationalize this, this argument had been made way back in 2007, and the court had affirmed that was the position in law in a case of Mohammed Sirat. Mohammed Sirat was a gentleman who ran for member of parliament for Wajir, I believe Wajir East. He won. There was an election petition, and part of the grounds that were advanced on the election petition is that he was not a Kenyan citizen because he had acquired Australian citizenship. And Justice Kimaru, this is way back before anybody knew MIGUNA was going to happen. Justice Kimaru actually ruled that because Mohammed Sirat was born was a citizen by birth, Kenyan citizen by birth, he could never lose his citizenship, whether or not he acquired Australian citizenship. So we were just advancing that same argument in MIGUNA, and Justice Mwita confirmed. The third argument that we made was that if you look at Section 87 and 89, which regulated citizenship under the old constitution, even where they talked about loss of citizenship on the basis of acquisition of a secondary citizenship, it required that be voluntarily acquired.
Okay.
In the case of MIGUNA, then the question was, did MIGUNA voluntarily acquire Canadian citizenship?
Or was he forced?
By circumstance.
Okay.
Yeah, assuming. And the court found, based on the fact that, in fact, Kenya had exiled him, then Kenya couldn't come and say it's him who had volunteered to go to Canada so that he can become Canadian citizen. Even assuming the government had proven that MIGUNA was a Canadian citizen. And I should pause the apart and say, by the way, the government has never been able to prove that MIGUNA is a Canadian citizen. The government has been able to prove that MIGUNA had a Canadian passport. Those are two very different things.
Okay, so Waikwa, I've got to stop you there before you go to the final point. And so because there's just a jump at that last statement that you've made. So because you hold a passport for a certain country doesn't necessarily mean that you are a citizen of that country. That is clear as mud. How?
Because, again, even if you look at the Kenyan Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, it talks about documents of citizens, documents that citizens are entitled to, and separate that from the actual fact of citizenship, right? So, starting from the Kenyan scenario. So, one cannot argue that just because you have a Kenyan passport, that means you are Kenyan. And just to give you an example, there are many people who obtain Kenyan passports, maybe sometimes through corruption, but does that make them Kenyan? It doesn't. Because again, remember, we talked about citizenship inhering in you on the basis of your rights as human, because either you were born in Kenya or because of your parental connection. So that's the first point. Why passport does not necessarily equate to citizenship.
Yeah.
But in law, remember too, it's law we are talking about here, and in law, anytime you make an allegation, you have to prove. The government makes an allegation that MIGUNA is a citizen of Canada. MIGUNA doesn't have to say, I'm not a citizen of Canada. But MIGUNA is entitled to the government proving that he's a citizen of Canada. That's exactly what happened in the Sirat situation. Because being a citizen of a country is also a question of facts. And the government has to bring credible facts to prove that. Kenyan government has never been able to do that.
And then on what basis do they deny him entry, even if he were a citizen of Canada? You know, why this pull and push? What argument, what opportunities are they, what conditions are they setting for MIGUNA for him to come back into the country?
Again, that is partly why this is so petty. In fact, the way I would describe it is to say the government is being extremely petty. And by the way, it's important for your listeners to know that citizens have a right, a constitutional right to be petty. But public officials, in their public official capacity, don't have that right. And government doesn't have a right to be petty. And now, what the government is doing with MIGUNA's case is being petty. Let's first of all even put the citizenship issue aside and just deal with what do you need to enter Kenya, even whether you are Kenyan or not Kenyan.
A visa.
And we're a tourist hub, you know? Everyone comes to Kenya.
Yes, Wanjiro. And remember, Kenya, for I think almost every country, if not all countries, you can obtain a visa at the port of entry.
Sure.
Right? You don't have to apply for your visa from Singapore or from Kigali or wherever you are traveling from. No, you can apply your visa at the port of entry. And the moment the government actually provides for that, then and you're within the class of people who are entitled to that, then the government can discriminate you. So at this point, there would not, even assuming MIGUNA wasn't able to travel as a Kenyan, there is no reason why the government should be interfering with his journey before he gets
into the country. Can we take a break on that note, Waikwa? Let's just take a look at weather and traffic. We'll come back with this conversation as we're getting to that point where then, okay, so moving forward, what happens and what should happen if we're saying following the law and abiding by it, then what should be the next course of action? I know CT has a question. It's burning. SpiceFM KE is where we are live streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. The conversation continues with constitutional lawyer Waikwa Wanyoike, looking at citizenship and the rights of citizens in the country. Keep it here. Conversation this morning in the Situation Room, Nduoko CT Muga, Wajiro Gikonyo, and also joined online by constitutional lawyer Waikwa Wanyoike. And we're looking at citizenship and the rights of citizens in the country, taking special focus rather on the MIGUNA case. Waikwa, as we're going to that break, finishing up on why the government is being petty, I know CT also had a question that he wanted to pose to you, as you do.
This isn't, MIGUNA's case isn't really new. There was a gentleman by the name of Sheikh Balala, who was the head of the Islamic Party of Kenya. Now, he not only lost his citizenship, but he was stranded in Germany for 4 years, and his passport was withdrawn because the government decided he was Yemeni. However, in 2018, a case was lodged in the High Court, and Justice Ogola awarded him 6 million shillings because the government had actually, violated his citizenship. That case, straightforward, court, same issue that you're suggesting, but there's one which has confused me. There is a Kenyan by the name of Mwende Mwinzi. She had been appointed by President Uhuru to be our ambassador to South Korea.
Right.
The usual vetting process went to Parliament, and Parliament said, you have to renounce one citizenship before you can actually take up this job. Now, what complicated matters further? Well, it's not as though she goes and knocks at the door of South Korea and says, I'm here. No, credentials are sent in advance, and South Korea had said, yeah, it's okay, we accept.
Come.
How does this work out? The president has appointed this person, there's the issue of this dual citizenship, and there is a problem here. I want your input on this one, because that one confused me.
So, Sweetie, it's interesting you talk about the case of Sheikh Balala. The interesting coincidence is that Balala was stuck in Germany and MIGUNA now is stuck in Germany. So there seems to be a common denominator.
Yeah.
But I think the fundamental point you've made is about what Justice Ogola did in 2018 in finding that the government had violated Sheikh Balala's constitutional rights and even awarded him damages for that. And remember, the court was actually looking mostly at the former constitution. And we know when dealing with Sheikh Balala's case, because that happened under the former constitution, even though there may have been obviously continuing violations. More importantly, under the 2010 constitution, which is when all this is playing out in MIGUNA's case, 2010 constitution is actually quite different, fundamentally different from the 1969 constitution. On citizenship, other than being transformative, it's actually restorative. So I talked about dual citizenship and why just because you became a dual citizen doesn't mean that you lost your citizenship. In fact, what 2010 Constitution does is that even where there is doubt that you may have lost your citizenship because of the way the law was worded, and maybe the law was convoluted in the past or was vague, and so an officer, in good faith, could actually interpret the former law as meaning that if you became a dual citizen, then you lost your citizenship. What the 2010 Constitution does is to be restorative, and that is why it uses the language of citizen by birth does not lose, right? Citizenship by acquiring a citizenship of another country. There is also another point that not many people talk about, which is also very restorative and similar to dual citizenship. It's one to do with marriage. It says you don't lose citizenship. A citizen by birth, again, never loses their citizenship on account of marriage or dissolution of marriage. Because that is important when you think about it historically, but also from the perspective of discrimination. Because the people who are more likely to lose citizenship on account of marriage are women. And the people who are likely to have been said to have lost their citizenship by birth are women. So there is that restorative aspect to it. And so what I once tried to be a teacher and maybe failed miserably. But I was told when you are a teacher, you say you have 4 points, you make the 4 points. I had initially said the reasons that we had advanced before Justice Muthui, in which he agreed with, and one of them was that in any event, it doesn't matter whether or not the law is interpreted as not having permitted citizenship in the past, because what the 2010 Constitution did, and this is the 4th point, was to make or was to be restorative, and in fact applies retroactively. And unlike your regular statute, constitutions can very quickly and easily apply retroactively, and that also was the benefit for Balala. And bringing now the Mwende Mwizi case, it shows you why this is all about impunity and abuse of power. Because, in fact, MIGUNA is in a better place when it comes to claiming rights to citizenship than Mwende Mwizi.
Why is that?
Even though, because when you think about it, MIGUNA has consistently had evidence confirmed by government that he's a citizen for a very long time. Whether it's in terms of how he became citizen, how he left the country, the document of identity, the passport which he got in 2007, his ID which he's had for a very long time, which was again renewed in 2012 by the government, the fact that government agencies cleared him to run for office, which is only a right available to citizens. You know, there is that very lengthy evidence. I'm not sure Mwende Mwizi it would have been able to show that sort of track record of evidence. But it doesn't matter, because I'm not trying to say that Mwende Mwizi's citizenship is lesser than
MIGUNA's.
That's not the point I'm trying to make. What I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make is the impunity that this government shows, that if you present it with the same facts, but 2 different people, it says this is the law that applies to you, but for this other person, this is the law that will apply to them.
It's entirely personal.
Right. So Waikwa,
entirely personal.
You know, fast forward to what's happening currently, and then even after the orders that have been given by court to then allow him back into the country. And then we see these games back and forth being played on, technicalities. If so, even if they are technicalities, what reason then would government have to be petty?
The reason why I don't know the reason why the government is being petty, other than that you have people who are relatively insecure, people in leadership who are relatively insecure, whether that is the political leadership going all the way to the president, because this is the kind of thing that the president can just direct his officials. Remember, this is a matter of national government. The president is the head of national government. This is a matter purely being dealt by the executive. So the buck actually stops with the president. So if the president himself was acting within the law, then he could direct his officials to respect the law and do what the court has done without in any way overstepping. But there is also the second layer of officials, which is the Matiangis, the Kibichos, the Kihalangwas, who, and then a third layer of officials, now the embassy officials, and the immigration directors and such. And I was watching MIGUNA's video at the Berlin embassy, and then yesterday the videos released by LSK President Nelson Hart. And at some point, I'm not sure whether to sympathize with those officials or just to be angry as a citizen in a Kenya, because the court orders are very clear. As a public official, you've taken an oath to respect the law, but it's very clear that even for very senior officials, you just sit there as an automaton and wait for somebody else to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So why did you go to school? Why are you a professional in the first place? They wouldn't want even to read the orders. They just don't want to know what is in there. They just wait for the phone call. At some point, actually, you have to sympathize with this, with these people, unfortunately. But whatever the case, the court orders are very clear. The court has said MIGUNA is a citizen by birth. The claim by the government that MIGUNA must apply to regain citizenship is not well-founded because MIGUNA never lost citizenship, and you don't apply to regain citizenship that you never lost. And it doesn't really matter, even assuming the court was wrong, because those orders have never been overturned, and there has been an attempt in the past. Then officials are required to respect those court orders. They can go to court and later and argue at the Court of Appeal or at the Supreme Court, but for now they have to respect those orders. And what the officials are doing, and especially the people like Muteshi, the smaller sort of middle-level public officials, is they're putting themselves in a position of jeopardy where they are taking orders, unthinkingly taking orders, and yet the consequences will end up being personal, because when you violate a court order, contempt is to you. It's not to the people who are making phone calls.
Right.
No, I was just going to say this mirrors the conversation we were having yesterday, where we've seen the AG step in to challenge the orders given by the court on Kibicho's actions. And we are seeing this recurring pattern of interference
Kinoti.
Kinoti's court orders, really trying to, just interfering with the due process of public institutions. And this is a leadership style. And yesterday when I went there and said, this is a characteristic of Jubilee, it reflects the highest authority, because when you interfere with institutions, really that's when, because what we're talking about is you've entered the realm of incompetence, you've also entered the realm of abuse of power. And this mirrors very much we are back to the Moi days. We are under our new constitutions, but we must remember constitutions, the law does not implement itself. It's implemented by people. And those people, unfortunately, instead of taking instruction from the constitution, are taking instruction from, the powers that appoint them.
Explain this to me, because I don't understand it. The incompetence. Where does it manifest itself?
Well, the incompetence is that this government is not able to execute the priorities that it has laid out. And as well as being incompetent, they are then also not able to are not following the constitution. And it puts us in jeopardy. So and again, I'll cite David D. He talked about a corrupt government, an incompetent government, and a government that is undemocratic, does not respect the rule of law.
Do you know what is interesting?
And this exemplifies that. This case actually exemplifies that.
If I just use a turn of phrase, they're actually competent.
In this case.
No.
In this particular case.
It really depends on what you want to do.
Yes, in
this particular case.
In the matters that they want to pursue, for instance, they competently lie to us continuously. Okay? Because you always hear things which you know very well won't happen. They competently ignore court orders. You see it very. It's like the things when people seem to have a clear agenda, quite aside from what they say. Because again, there's competency there. What they say is just what they say. Please don't expect that anything will come out of it. So, and there's consistency in it. They're not even conflicted.
Now, the point I was making...
You can more or less even predict that, this is what they're going to say, and this is what is going to happen.
So the point I was making, so that we don't get lost in the use of that one term, which applies to this government, and I hope
of course, you gotta throw
but
that
in this case, we are talking about abuse of power. We are talking about being under a new constitutional dispensation. We are talking about constitutions do not implement themselves. I'll say that it is old wine, old skin, new wine. Or is it old, the way
it's old wine skin and new wine don't mix.
So the new wine is the constitution. The old skin is KANU, reloaded.
Okay, Waikwa, over to you.
Yes.
Yeah, but I just want to make, I guess, 2 points that shouldn't be lost. Just on this, first of all, on this question about competency and all that. You see, competency is both institutional and individual. So when you hire somebody like under the 2010 Constitution, if you take a position, you're presumed to be competent.
Yes.
And you are expected to be competent. And in fact, you're vetted for competence. And that vetting is not community vetting. It's not whether your community is competent. It's you. Do you have the training? Do you have the experience? So when you have a director of immigration, for example, then the question is, what competency does he have to occupy that position? He needs to understand the law. He needs to understand how immigration works and all that. And in fact, when it comes to immigration, he should be the foremost authority. But the point I was trying to make earlier, and this is why at individual level, people are not showing competency, and obviously at the institutional level, they're not showing competency, is because they're not applying their skills, they're not applying their thinking. They're waiting for somebody else to think for them. And they're waiting for politicians to think for them.
Okay.
And we know, and I need to say it.
Yeah, we can't hear you very well on this one, Waikwa. Maybe if you can just adjust that sound really quickly. You seem to have lost your sound there.
I hope you can hear me now.
It may be the
No,
connection.
maybe the connection is a bit off, but maybe we can just sort that out as we continue that conversation. So now, CT, even as we work on that, CT, when we talk about now saying that there's a blatant disregard for these court orders, there's a blatant disregard for that, because at the end of the day, the man is not going to come into the country if the government of the day has decided that this is not what they want to happen.
You see, what Wanyoike is talking about is the aspiration we have and the hope that when somebody occupies a certain position, that they will carry out their functions in a certain way. And what
Impartially.
and what I'm saying
Fairly.
is, there is a mandate that the individuals have And what we see as incompetence is them competently following the mandate that they've been given.
But no,
And it goes again, yes.
But no, but
if
let's
somebody
listen.
is obfuscating the law, that's what they're doing it deliberately. It's not as though.
It's not that
But
they cannot do
Waikwa
this.
has challenged us because
Yes.
this is the notion we have of Kenyans. We are so conditioned to accept, these violations.
This
He
isn't
has said,
accepting
when-
Wanjiro. This
no.
is stating it as it is.
What I'm trying to say is Waikwa has given us a spin on that I really like. He's saying when you're employed to undertake to a public position, you're expected to implement the law, and your competence is based on your being able to implement the law as required. So that's I think the required bar. When you are recruited to the position,
That's something. It's aspirational.
when you're required to, it's not aspirational.
It is. The
Why do
appointing
you expect
authority has an agenda that is often very contrary to the very thing that we are saying.
Why do we allow our public officers to employ a lower standard than we hold to ourselves? CT, if you are in this position and you are behaving incompetently, maybe you're taking orders from wherever, you wouldn't last a week. You might not even last a day.
But if the
But
agenda,
why do we
or if-
allow
if
public
the-
officers
if
who
the
we pay
agenda,
to
if the agenda of the person in authority over you is for you to behave in that certain manner, it will now make sure that you toe that particular
But
line.
you're missing the point. I am the employer. I am the citizen. Sovereignty lies with me.
So you think?
No. The point I'm saying is, why do we allow our public officers to get off with it, and including defining very low expectations for them? So Waikwa has just, he's kind of just raised the bar for us to say, no, these guys are incompetent.
Waikwa, we'd like to get your
Yeah,
final
and
comment
I
on
want to
this.
add one more point. I would want one more point on personal competence. There is also something called professional pride. When you're a professional, the reason you're a professional is because there are certain things you can't do because they are beneath your professionalism. And so it's not just that these people are incompetent, it's clearly that they don't have professional pride. If they are willing just to take clearly illegal directions from people just because the persons may have political power, yet they are the technocrats, they are the professionals, but just because they don't want to lose their jobs.
Going forward and looking at how this case
But
is
I
unfolding.
wanted to make
Yes.
I just wanted to make one last point that I think it's important to clarify. In terms of the orders of the court, what the court said is MIGUNA should obtain an emergency travel document. The reason the court asked that MIGUNA obtain an emergency travel document because that's the document he is required to present to the airline to be able to board the airline. When he gets to Kenya, the court said he should identify himself using his ID. Because if he has a Kenyan ID, which has been given by the Kenyan government, and the Kenyan government says that IDs are given to citizens, then that is sufficient proof. This whole idea about regaining citizenship or being able to prove citizenship for him to even travel to Kenya is just quite ridiculous. Because as long as MIGUNA can get to Kenya, whichever way he gets to Kenya, and people, by the way, travel with expired passports all the time. Government actually moves people using expired passports all the time. As long as he can get himself to Kenya, then the government has an obligation, once he identifies himself,
To let
allow
him
him. In fact, he doesn't have to identify himself with an ID or any document.
All
the
right.
moment there is a public official who can say, I actually can vouch this is MIGUNA, and I know MIGUNA is from Kenya, that is sufficient for purposes of satisfying the law.
There'll be interesting days ahead. Waikwa Wanyoike, constitutional lawyer, thank you for being part of that conversation with us today. Asante sana.